Going over how to install the rear Dana 41 differential housing cover onto the differential housing on the axle on this location where my finger points on this surface. There will be a gasket installed, making sure that the oil stays in differential housing. Please note before we install a differential housing cover onto the axle, there is going to be threads that will use the same holes as the cover will for the two brake line brackets. The right brake line bracket will use this thread, while the left brake line will use these two threads. Now going over all the various parts for the differential housing cover install. At the very top left, we have the differential housing cover. Moving this direction, we have the differential drain plug. Moving down, we have the fill plug for the differential housing cover. And moving down, we have the 10 bolts. These 10 bolts are 3-inch bolts, 3/4 inch long, coarse thread with lock washer, and all 10. These 10 bolts will be installed holding your differential housing cover to the actual differential housing. And moving this direction, we have the Dana 41 axle gasket. This gasket will be installed on your differential housing cover, and the gasket will also be mounted to this surface on the differential housing. When installing your gasket, ensure that you use Permatex #2 Forma gasket sealant. This sealant will be installed on both surfaces of the gasket to ensure we have a nice seal on our differential housing cover. Please note when installing your differential housing cover, we also install these two brake line brackets. These brackets will be installed using the same threads as a differential housing cover using these bolts. And the critical part is we actually have to use #2 Forma gasket on the threads to prevent oil seeping up the threads. The axle T-bracket will be installed on the left side of the differential housing. The axle T-bracket will be installed on these two threads where my finger points. The right brake line support bracket will be installed on the left side of the differential housing. The brake line bracket will be installed on this thread on differential housing where my finger points. Once the two brackets are installed, then we can install the right and left brake line using the brake line clamp. And then on top of the brake line bracket, there will be a brake hose T-fitting installed using these threads, and the bolt that will be used is a 1/4 inch bolt, 1 inch long, coarse thread with lock washer. Acetone will also be used to clean the differential housing cover surface where the gasket will be installed, and also use acetone to clean the axle housing on this surface where the gasket will be installed. Lastly, a torque wrench will be used to torque the 10 bolts that mount the differential housing cover to the differential housing between 15 and 25 foot-pounds. Before doing any gasket job, make sure to use acetone to wipe down the surface where the gasket will be installed. In addition, also make sure to acetone the axle differential housing cover as well. It is now time to install the rear Dana 41 axle gasket onto the differential housing itself. The gasket will be placed on the differential housing cover on the surface where my finger points and on the surface on the differential housing on the axle. And to do so, we will apply Permatex #2 Forma gasket sealant to this surface on the cover, and then we will apply sealant to the surface on one side of the gasket. Then we will make sure the holes are aligned. It only goes on one direction with the holes aligning. Then we'll apply more Permatex gasket sealant to the surface on the other side of the gasket. Lastly, we will apply gasket sealant to the surface on the differential housing on the axle as well. Don't forget to apply your gasket sealant to the 10 bolt threads to prevent oil migration up the threads. The first step is to apply gasket sealant to the differential housing cover. The next step is to make sure you get your gasket aligned with the holes, only goes on one way. Get the holes aligned, flip it over, and put more gasket sealant on the surface of the gasket. With gasket sealant now on your gasket and your differential housing cover, now we can put them together, just aligning all the holes. With the holes aligned, now apply more gasket sealant to the other side of the gasket. With all surfaces gasket sealed, now we move to the differential housing on the axle. Now apply gasket sealant to the surface on the differential housing on the axle. Also ensure that you apply gasket sealant to all the bolt threads. With gasket sealant applied to all surfaces, now we can install a differential housing cover onto the differential housing on the axle. The trick is just to align the holes, and the fill plug is towards the bottom, and we'll just line all the holes up. Now it is time to install the differential housing cover. Just get one of your bolts. I would just start from the top so the cover can just hang there when we get the other ones aligned. And now just stick your first bolt through, just threading it in. Continue to install the rest of your bolts as I just showed you, but leave these two holes on your left and this one hole on your right not in yet, because we have to put our brake line brackets on these bolts. If you can't get your bolt to go through the cover, that means your gasket is probably in the way of the hole. So to move out of the way, just get a screwdriver, just push it out of the way, and then that'll make room for your bolt threads, and then it'll just go right in a lot easier. Install the axle T bracket facing outwards with the thread pointing towards you on the top left of your differential housing cover with these two top threads. Just have to bolt them in the same as we just did the rest of the bolts. Finally, install the last bolt on the brake line support clip. Before tightening this bolt, make sure your brake line is at least in somewhat general line as it's supposed to be, because you won't be able to move it after you get this bolt tightened. Next, use an impact driver to sink these bolts in deeper. The next step is to tighten all these bolts down. Use an impact driver to sink these threads in deeper, and make sure you tighten it in a star pattern or across. You can try to put even pressure on the gasket. The last step, but make sure you do it, is now torque all of these bolts between 15 and 25 foot-pounds. I have the torque wrench set to 20 foot-pounds, and we'll start at the very top and work in a star pattern to tighten the gasket. The gasket install is now complete. It's a very messy job, as you can see. You got gasket sealing kind of everywhere, but that's a good thing. We know it's going to be a good seal. We have a nice speed of gasket sealing coming out the other side of the gasket, so we know it's going to be a good seal. I will just clean up the excess before it dries with a clean rag. Install the fill plug on the differential housing cover. This is just to prevent debris from entering the differential housing. I will just thread this on loosely for now, as we have to still add oil to the differential housing. Once oil is added to your housing, then I would add Permatex thread sealant to prevent oil migration up the threads on your fill plug, but for now, put on loosely. The last step is to install the drain plug at the bottom of the differential housing where these threads are, where my finger is pointing. Before you install your drain plug, make sure you apply Permatex thread sealant to the threads to prevent oil migration up the threads. With a good amount of thread sealant on the drain plug, insert it into the bottom of the differential housing, just threading it in, and work the threads back and forth just to get the thread sealant in the threads better. Finally, use a torque wrench and torque the drain plug to 20 foot-pounds using a 1/2-inch drive. And that's how you install the Dana 41 axle gasket on the differential housing cover. It's a complete gasket job. It won't leak if you do it this way. The next step is to install the brake lines and get that all set up. Click on the link over here to watch how to install the rear brake lines. Thanks for watching and subscribe.